just to kind of start, we're going to have a little bit of a centering exercise led by Jaden from the Centre Knowledge Equity. Then you're going to meet the advisors of the fund who are going to talk a little bit about their kind of experience, followed straight ahead by Baljeet and Joe, who are going to talk to the learning report that's being released during this event today, highlighting kind of the key learnings, the deeper dives into kind of the challenges of shifting power and how we can do that in a really non-tokenistic but equitable and true way, followed by a live Q&A, which will involve kind of advisors, staff members, for you to really ask all of those like honest and open questions. And then lastly, we'll end the event with the advisors giving a challenge and a provocation to the sector as a whole, with all of you incredible kind of sector leaders in this space. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand on to Jaden.
Big up, Callum, and I want to say a massive thank you for everyone coming down today to kind of just share this moment with us, but also to hear about the challenges, the amazing things that came out of this work, and some of the amazing leaders that have been doing some amazing work within this space. But also a lot is going on in our lives right now. So how do we center ourselves and be mindful of this moment and come together? So it's a little bit of a activity, but it won't take too much moving or doing anything around. But what I want everyone to do in this space at the moment is just to close our eyes for a second. And as we're closing our eyes, I want us to think back to a time when you was a young person, and for some that might be more recent than others, and think about the state of the world that you was living in. And then to think about what was the world that you wanted to imagine. What was the world that you could imagine? And what were some of the challenges you were going through and some of the things that you wanted to change within that world? And as we're doing it, just take a few minutes, just a little mindful pause to reflect on that. I'm gonna slowly bring us back into this space, because I'm sure we could be doing that for a lot longer. And in a world full of madness, sometimes it's nice just to have a pause and reflect on why we're here. And as we're coming back into the space, I don't know what feelings were coming up, but just to hold on to what that comes with, whether it was optimism, hopefulness, hopelessness, whatever challenges that come with, just bring that into this space when we're thinking about some of the learning that's going to arise from this conversation, but also why we're here today, and really challenge ourselves to think about what more can be done after this, and that's why we're here. So thank you everyone for coming together, and we're about to play a little video that kind of intros Challenge and Change from some of our amazing advisors and young people who have been involved in this. So yeah, we can get the video up.
Hi, my name is Chloe Deakin, and I'm one of the 3 young advisors who have been working over the last year on the Challenge and Change Fund. We're going to hear from 6 of the amazing 30 young people who have been funded.
One of the most brilliant things about Challenge and Change is that it is young people making decisions. I find it really interesting being able to resonate with some of the applications that were being put in. It gave me a lot of hope for our generation, because I thought actually there are so many young people who care about these issues up and down the country, not just in London or in the big cities.
focusing on using live streaming and telepresence technologies to help people who have a difficult time leaving the house or physically accessing performance venues have access to opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have. What we are doing with the funding from the Blagrave Trust is investing in the equipment that we need to build a portable live streaming setup that we can use to bring housebound performers into live performance spaces to a live audience.
The more I read into it, the more I found that systematic racism and unconscious bias were playing a massive role in how Black and minority ethnic people experienced mental health and how they were supported with it. When I was sharing my experiences of racism, it was being implied that that wasn't a factor in my mental health. Through Challenge and Change, I've been on this journey to raise awareness for that. If I could do a community project where I get people's voices and I help them turn it into something artistic, and the best way I could think of to do that was through the creative arts.
Some of our young adults have been to prison, some of our young adults have been on probation. We kind of aim to empower them to have a say, to kind of shape and influence policy, provide a platform for them to be heard. One of the main things that we do try to push is that young adults are their own category. You turn 18 at midnight on your 18th birthday, your whole mindset doesn't shift, your brain's still developing up until 25. It's very much a collaborative, it's very much youth-led, it's very much about everyone participating. And we've been able to pay like the young justice advisors for their time. Like if they spend a day working on one of the guides, we can pay them now. That to me, it just makes so much difference.
I just had to create a safe space for Romani people where we're not perpetually having to start from square one. So the stuff that I'm doing now is just a starting step to a larger goal. With the money, we've been able to source materials and all the items needed for a package. So not only just including, nice items like traditional clothes, so headscarves and ribbons, but also things like tinned food, reusable masks, or anything that the community says that they're in need of at that moment in time.
Interrupted is a collective creating an anthology of stories of young people who've experienced these challenges in accessing higher educations due to the fact that they're considered international students or don't have access to student finance. And we hope that collating these stories into a book alongside some policy ideas from organizations that are advocating for this change on a day-to-day basis would hopefully change the hearts and minds of not only the UK general population, but hopefully policymakers and people in positions of power who could hopefully shift the needle and make sure that these young people can reach their ambitions.
We've all kind of had various frustrations with the schooling system, and we started off by running like a series of workshops that were kind of exploring youth identity and exploring the schooling system. We want to sort of create questions that you could like frame a workshop around. Could be, what if young people were allowed to use their imaginations in school? Or what if young people were allowed to bring the problems from their own communities and their own homes into school and were given the tools to learn how to deal with those problems? So the money that we've got from Challenge and Change is going to enable us to kind of support our living while we're doing this thinking and while we're trying to launch a campaign, which is just so vital because it's not something that's seen as a job. It's not something that's seen as work, like young people trying to actively challenge what's going on.
I hope you've been as inspired as I have about these applications. Stay tuned and watch this space.
Thank you for the video, and now we're going to hear from one of our young advisors who have been involved in a lot of the design and like the inception of Challenge and Change, but also just creating a mad wave herself. So I'm excited to bring through Days to share a little bit about the design of the fund and your involvement. Over to you, Days.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always amazing to kind of watch that film and realize like we've really done something that's been useful to many young people. So just to give you kind of an intro to myself, I'm Days. I was one of the young advisors on this grant in the first iteration, but I'm also a trustee. And I have come from a particularly interesting outlook of being an activist who sat on the other side of like grant applications, but then also being a trustee who sits on the other side getting in the grant applications. And from this, I kind of know the barriers to entry for a lot of people, especially working on the grassroots, when it comes to trying to navigate the funding world and trying to navigate funding like specific projects, especially projects that are challenging and changing systems that a lot of people don't want changed. So there's something that's particularly marvelous about this. And that was where I think a lot of us who worked on the grant was coming from. It was about how do we create a grant that helps people, and especially young people, in a way that young people need, rather than the way that we think young people need. And I think that was very much a learning curve internally at the organization, of learning how to listen and trust youth, and learning how to kind of trust them in navigating what they need. And I love the part where Kate talks about the living costs. We're in a cost of living crisis. And for a lot of young people, especially activists, there is like this thing of where sometimes it's not even needing resources for projects, it's needing the resource of time, and being able to fund their living expenses through something like this has provided the time for thinking, for feeling, for figuring out the next steps to start making really big impacts. We were lucky enough to fund 30 different partners working all across different topics around social justice, whether it's climate, whether it's knife crime, whether it's the youth prison justice system. There is just like quite a widespread of issues, and it kind of just shows like young people's interests aren't just in one place, it's spread around. And there was a very interesting learning that I feel like I got from it, which is like the holistic need of like addressing issues from all angles, because a lot of the projects, it wasn't just a single issue, it was about one issue and how it intertwined with many others, which was also a very interesting learning for me. The process was very collaborative, and I loved how, as a young advisor, we were actually able to morph, and we were given the support that we needed in grant making, as none of us had been grant makers before. But then also we were given the freedom to really explore some of the boundaries that we have when applying for grants and how we can break through, whether that's creating really easy application of where, you know, you can do it through writing, through film, through poetry, many different ways. So we even just calling us up and having assistance in writing grant applications as well was something that we found that lots of people who, you know, said that they had learning disabilities and probably wouldn't have applied if it was just a written grant, and giving them kind of access to the space. And then also in the grant making decisions of where the board basically let us kind of go mad as young people and go, as these young people are bringing us their projects, we actually have the power to make the decision, and our board will trust in us to make the right ones, which was really amazing and very empowering, to kind of we tried to make sure we got a whole spread of different topics as well. And we were having lots of questions around our own internal biases whilst making these decisions as well. But yeah, so it was very much an interesting process, and a process that actually ended up taking longer than expected. And I loved that part of it, of where we kind of acknowledged that this is going to be rough and ready, but then also it takes the time that it needs, which is very different to a lot of grant process of where we're trying to get money out so quickly that we don't take the time that needs to bring everyone along with us. So I think those are like my reflections on like this whole process, and I hope that more grant makers kind of see the learnings from this and figure out how we can incorporate this real active youth-led grant making in all of our organizations, because that's what young people are asking of us right now. But yeah, so Jaden, is there anything that you feel like I should have covered which I haven't in my brain fart of my reflections?
That was fire. And we'll hear from you later on the panel as well. So big up for jumping in, Days. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you.
Callum, over to you.
Wicked, yeah. So next up we have Joe and Baljeet, who are gonna they've been through this whole program since the start, and they're some of the co-authors of the kind of learning report coming out. So they're gonna share the story from kind of a shifting power on the other side of the kind of lens of it all. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you. It's always a bit tough to go after Days and Jaden and Callum, but it's amazing to be here. It's been a long journey for all of us that have been involved, so it's just wonderful to have a moment to share and reflect more widely. And I just wanted to say big shout to Chris from Zing, who I know is on this call, because Zing and Ellis Campbell Foundation also supported this work. So you guys, the report's on our website, and I think it'll get shared directly with you all as well. So there's a huge amount of detail in there, and we just can't possibly do justice to it all. So I'm just going to focus on 4 kind of key things that I think are interesting and useful, and then Baljeet's going to expand and kind of riff off that in her own way. So I suppose the headline is like, this work is entirely possible. And whilst the process elements of the design of challenge and change and working with young advisors are really important, and part of the kind of changing the status quo around who gets to make decisions in the funding world, the real significant shifting of power, if you like, is primarily through the grants that we were giving directly to young people. And these are young people who were already mobilizing and working, mainly in collectives, completely outside the formal youth sector, and who, with the handful of an exception of a handful of the partners we funded, had never received any funding or support previously. And I think that is what's so rich and interesting, and just basically points to a huge world of potential out there that we're missing. So the things that I'm going to talk to, perhaps a bit more from a funder perspective, about risk, the work of the young activists themselves, the kind of culture that you need for this work, and a little bit on impact. And Callum's going to stop me if I'm going on too long. So first of all, just on risk, I think for a lot of people in the sector, this work is considered risky, in that we're funding unconstituted groups or individuals, and we're used to funding charities, and perhaps also magnified for some by the fact that they're young people. And indeed, in Blagrave, we'd been kind of toying with the idea of funding young people directly for a good year before this programme launched. But basically what happened was, in the light of the pandemic, and all the events that happened in 2020 and the huge challenges that young people were facing, including all the racial justice issues that were being surfaced, we realised that this was basically the moment to stop thinking and to act. And it was really reassuring to learn quite quickly through working with charity lawyers that we could feasibly fund this work under the charitable purpose of advancement of citizenship, and manage risks, fairly satisfactorily. So, for example, we provided legal training for all the successful applicants so they could understand the legal parameters of the funding. And, the young people that we funded took it really seriously. They were amazing. We offered, and they exist, platforms like Open Collective to receive money. And this worked well for those that used it. Many chose not to, and we certainly didn't impose any particular approach on them. And as Days has said, we have a culture and a board in Blagrave, like Days, who's a trustee, that have a deep understanding of the nature of this work. We're willing to kind of back an idea and embrace the new. So I guess my point is that both the legal and financial risks were manageable, and I don't think we should overstate them, before we've explored them. And then, for us as well, like a key element of our thinking around risk is like, what is the risk of not doing this work? If you think about intergenerational inequality and you think about all the implications for social cohesion that exist right now, like, what if we don't do this? What if we don't invest in the current generation of young people? And how can we talk about youth-led change and the power of community organising, which many people are doing now, which is great, if we aren't serious about actual transfer of resources to young people so they can act? And kind of what does it say about we really feel about young people if we won't trust? So I think when looking at risk, like taking a broader view and analysing our own kind of bias and assumptions about what the real risks are just feels incredibly important. The second thing I wanted to say is just that the learning for us has just been mind-blowing, which is why it's taken so long to get to the point of this learning report and the webinar, because it's just been coming in apace. And basically that's because we've been working with young activists who are driving the youth-led change space, who previously we'd not really been paying attention to or supporting. So like the first thing we learned is that young people are out there and ready to be funded. So we launched this fund, and, you know, as a funder, we don't have reach into communities across the country, but we had 192 applications in the first round, largely driven through the young advisors and our partnership with the Centre for Knowledge Equity, that reach came. But it was just amazing to get so many applications from young people, as I said, that have never applied for funding before. And the challenge and change is we're not simply speaking out about injustices, but we're organising, mobilising and supporting each other in much wider and diverse ways than we knew. So they were carrying out, for example, activities to support young people to challenge decisions that directly impact on their lives or on the communities that they're connected to. They were creating spaces for visioning as well as reflection and critique of their own approaches and campaigning and what it actually means. They had, as Days mentioned, they had a clear and deep understanding of intersectionality of different injustices that often doesn't come across in a lot of the kind of more formal youth sector work we fund. So the learning has like progressed our understanding of youth-led change at a pace and scale unlike anything else that we funded. And it is hard not to conclude that this is largely because the learning is coming directly from young people themselves, unmediated and undiluted, if you like, and that this proximity to lived experience is incredibly important for funders, and by the way, provides all the inspiration you need to kind of want to keep doing this work, which Rochelle will talk a bit about. The third point I wanted to touch on was culture and skills. So I do think the culture we have in Bladegrove has been key to doing this work. We had a real commitment to listening to young people for many years before we launched Challenge and Change, to kind of learning by doing and iterating as we go. You can call it innovation if you like, many people do, but I view this way of working rather as kind of acts of optimism and hope in the youth space. And this was apparent when we informed young people that they'd been funded, by the way. You know, there was joy and even tears. And I think it made us really humbly reflect on what that told us about this programme. But we also have learned over the course of the last year and a half, and all of this is like a continuing journey, that we need to probably rethink the skills we have as funders if we want to work in partnership with young people and invest in them directly in a different way. So we're building a different kind of team now, with youth work skills, digital capacity, facilitation skills in the team led by young people in our team. And so I think that the funding system in particular needs to kind of diversify its skill sets. And finally, on kind of culture, like understanding the true nature of partnership and trust. So we have huge respect for the Centre for Knowledge Equity, obviously, and their insight and challenge on lived experience has been invaluable. And I think, you know, one of the learnings is that you can't enter this work and siphon off bits to others, but rather lean into the work together and alongside each other, kind of recognizing the complementarity of what you bring, but you know, being willing to be really challenged as well. And it's not always easy, and it's not always been easy, but it's essential for progress and to kind of move further and go beyond and more deeply. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was on impact. And I guess it relates to risk, because some might say, well, you know, is there a risk that this work doesn't have impact? All these small grants, by the way, the grants were between £2,000 and £10,000. The average grant was about £4,500. So we had no prescribed outcomes for the young people's work, and we deliberately funded a diverse group of young people. I can see my time's running out. So basically, our feeling is essentially that we're just a step in these young people's journeys, and we should be really humble about that. We're funding some of them now. But in a sector where social justice work that's trying to create structural change represents such a small amount of the total funding, and resources to young people is tiny, having understood the potential of young people, like providing some scale in terms of numbers of young people growing year on year, feels really equitable and really strategic. So like on impact, you know, young people are not homogenous, and their concepts of campaigning and routes to impact are as varied as they are. Some have gone to set up CICs and leveraged a lot more money through crowdfunding, through all sorts of things. Others are doing deep and important work connecting with their peers to kind of imagine an alternative reality. Others are delivering services in a community. But basically our notions of what's legitimate to support under the banner of youth-led change is stretched, and ultimately it's young people themselves who should define what success looks like. And surely for us, the most important thing is that we're laser sharp in our understanding of who we are here to serve, which for us is young people experiencing and challenging injustice. And we should meet them where they are, not prescribe what we think they should be doing. There's more that I could say. Have I got any more time? Like one last, no, fine. Over to Baljit.
Oh, hi everyone, and thank you so much, Jo. It's an absolute honour to share community with you all as a collaborator organisation with Young Changemakers and Blagrave. Jayden and Callum asked me to share a few insights from the Centre for Knowledge Equity as a design and delivery partner. More details can be found in the report that's launched today, but I thought I would just riff off, as Jo said, of some of the things she said. But I think it's important to start by saying that the decision to support Blagrave was an easy decision for us, despite all the pandemic response we were doing to shift resources to grassroots communities and lived experience leaders during the pandemic. And the reason why that decision was so easy was because of Blagrave's work, but deep commitment to handing over power and resource over to young change makers. And we just want to appeal to funders in the room to follow suit as well, because investing in change makers with direct personal first-hand experience of inequitable and unjust systems is not only possible, but it's absolutely necessary if we really want to work together to address the violence and harm our people and planet are facing. I thought I'd start with a bit about in terms of the design of the fund. As Blagrave has done, you as funders are accountable for who you reach out to and who you fund to support change in the world. The onus is on you to also, as funders, to seek out communities and to work with them rather than expect them to find you and do all the work with you. Challenge and Change basically did this. But we also need to recognise that funders need support too, and the humility of Blagrave was really crucial as part of that, because you're as systems actors as well, and Challenge and Change has beautifully shown that change makers are also ready and willing to work alongside you as equal partners. Days, Chloe, Jovan were just on the go, working with us at speed to get the fund designed. But we need to change our collaboration and working practices to make these types of collaborations meaningful. And in order to do that, we really need to understand that pre-existing models of collaboration with communities are not fit for purpose. We need to create really new spaces for different and unique forms of knowledge and expertise to unite and work in unison to design new funds and other programs of work for the non-funders in the building. But that work requires relational time to build trust and harmony, especially where there's been a massive damaging disconnect between a kind of a top-down approach and the divide and rule that power structures have created and the cultures that have been created. And that requires time. We're humans, we need space together. But as Joe said, it also requires us to really look at our internal cultures so that we can operationalize equity and to create those constructive and effective spaces for challenge, so that communities, young change makers, partners and grantees can challenge one another, and spaces for discomfort to happen with compassion, and structural and system change can only happen when we step out of that comfort zone, and it's not easy, folks, right? It's been a journey. It really isn't easy, and as the great Frederick Douglass said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. But we also learned that fast-paced design, which it was, and deep equity work aren't happy bedfellows, and there will inevitably be a tension between rapid speed of design and delivery, and as well as building the systems and processes and structures that are really needed to hand over power to young change makers. But also what we were doing at the same time is capturing learning and pivoting in real time, and that requires support as well. And it means often thinking about taking on new tasks, unexpected activities, extending timelines, and our role really was to support and push hard conversations with Blagrave about these emerging issues that were being amplified always by the change makers. But most importantly, when you create those spaces, the magic will happen, and the wisdom shared by Chloe, Jovan and Days, it has just been phenomenal, and this learning has emerged from their work, right? The report says a lot, shares a lot. We've really, tried to put that in there. But the most important things that I want to highlight that we learned from the young advisors is communication and language is key. Even in the application process, you have to really deeply reflect on how you're speaking to young change makers. Often what's happening is that the language you're using is inaccessible, but often funders were often over and at times under intellectualizing terminologies that young change makers use and communities use, and sometimes these terms aren't even being used by the communities we're trying to reach. And so working hand in hand with communities, whether they're young change makers or other change makers with lived experience, is truly, truly important and critical to create programs that are accessible, inclusive and meaningful. It'll pay dividends. But also this notion, and Days was a massive advocate for this, of flexible funding is a necessity for justice and systems change work to happen. Campaigners and activists are out there doing work in real time, and they need to focus on that work, not on funder requirements. And it allows young change makers to innovate and pivot and build their own emerging strategies as real-time injustices are playing out in the world and impacting their lives. But this whole new way of working, the wisdom, has also highlighted in Challenge and Change a whole new level of understanding of the profile of change makers that surface, often hidden and working tirelessly in communities. And that's the amplification of young leaders and change makers who are carrying out their social purpose work in different social justice spaces using different mediums of change, as Daisy has highlighted as well, outside of the mainstream notions of activism, campaigning and policy influencing work. And also young change makers and the challenging changers highlighted the need for spaces to allow for reflection and dialogue in community to happen, which is crucial, that working communities and the heart of communities, community spaces and services are also incredibly powerful, incredible routes for wider systems change beyond just the placard of a protest, and also just policy influencing notions as well that we traditionally rely on. So this need for us to continue this work helps to amplify the diversity of profiles and approaches that young change makers are really leading, that can help us with our social justice work as well. And I think that this whole notion, I'm just like riffing off you, Joe, here when you were talking about what does success look like. Well, the notions of impact are really a key pillar of current power structures of the sector. We often reduce it to these things of like theory of change and how it can be measured, project outputs, ongoing funding, but that reduction, activities, forming legal entities, but that reduction moves us away from the notion of change making, being all about systems change, where systems are complex, evolving, and systems change work by young people is being deployed in very different ways. And we have to trust that those change making journeys led by young people are driving change as well. And that flexibility needed for that vision to be for a vision of young people to be driving their work is truly crucial. And this notion of risk, right, folks, we cannot, it's plagued our sector, the legal and operational anxieties, and we rely on the due diligence to appease those fears, to understand charities, their track record, their financial health, etc., etc. But it was so different, viewed differently by the young advisors. But with the support of charity lawyers and experts, it wasn't hard to set aside a long-standing, like Joe said, about funding non-registered entities, individuals, unconstituted groups who have a charitable purpose. It's not hard, it's possible, and we can't labour that point enough. And it also just shows how we can get stuck in our own kind of existing frameworks. We need to be bolder, like Blagrave have been. And it's also the fact that funder accountability is not simply about giving away money, but ensuring that we're also ensuring that those we're supporting and investing, and especially young change makers, we're not setting them up to fail. It's not about saying, here you go, here's some money, now go for it, you have all the answers. Young change makers during onboarding were so humble in sharing their anxieties with humility, because they wanted to do their work well. So we listened deeply and designed a support package in real time, which was hard work, but it was necessary because we have a responsibility to work alongside them as allies and as comrades as well. And so a huge shout out to Jaden and Rochelle. Your work in delivering that program has been incredible. Again, young change makers leading that within our teams to do that work is critical. And this notion of safeguarding that we also hold on to. Often funders take the role of experts in assessing safeguarding for communities, when in truth, funders should be really truly understanding how communities are implementing safeguarding fit for purpose for their own communities. And the young change makers, the challenging changes, taught us that, and we needed space to work alongside them to hear what safeguarding meant to protect their communities. And so it's a willingness to actually work together, and Blagrave is really investing in that, and challenging change in our young people who are acutely aware of safeguarding is to really think about how do we make safeguarding accessible to young people where possible. But also young people can also be those who have the knowledge to actually share on safeguarding. The youth workers, social workers, activists, it's so crucial. And finally, I'm going to finish, I know Callum's like telling me, but I really think this is an important thing to say about notion of power. It's a term that has been long bandied around with hashtags on sharing and shifting power in communities on the hard edges of injustice. For the fund to continue to be youth-led, is evolution also needs to be led by young people. Being youth-led means continually critically questioning who is holding power over each aspect of the fund. And Blagrave will have even harder work to do now that the fund is established. It can be easy to slip back into the status quo approach to funder-led decision making, and it's crucial for the behalf of the elect movement that I say that we must ensure that young change makers, that younger change makers, do not fall into the traps of their predecessors, where young non-elect leaders find themselves in positions of power, speaking on behalf of young elect leaders. And Callum, I'm so sorry, and over to you.
No, it's okay. I'm just going to pass straight over to Rochelle, who's kind of, taking challenge and change forward into the next iteration, and is going to give a little bit of an update on challenge and change too.
Thank you, Callum, and hello, everyone. I've been looking after kind of challenge and change since March of last year when I started at Blagrave, and not to sound like a broken record, but there was so much learning that came from that first kind of iteration, from the advisors we were working with to the application process, the support offer, to who we were here to serve, and loads of that learning has kind of been implemented in this round of challenge and change and moving forward. So this year with challenge and change, we decided to make it lived experience leaders fund and be really explicit in that. Last year we were kind of hoping for it but wasn't really explicit, whereas this year, figuring out who we're here to serve as Blagrave, it just felt only right to make sure that that's who challenge and change was here to serve this year. We've made sure that the application process has stayed simple and easy. We got really great feedback on that last year, and the only difference this year is just asking the young people to tell us a little bit about themselves. Otherwise the application process kind of stayed exactly the same. We're kind of looking at the support offer and evolving that based on the feedback that we've had from the advisors and it's still changing. We're still trying to stay live to it. We know that the young people are going to require the legal sessions with the charity lawyers. We know that we legally need to do some safeguarding training, but also we're giving the young people access to a safeguarding expert throughout the whole program, so that they can work with someone on trying to build their own policies and really understanding what they need as an organization in how they're going to work. And yeah, we're going to be running a big welcome day. I think this year we don't have the COVID restrictions as much, so having everyone in person to like meet each other, riff off each other, is going to be absolutely incredible. And on the back of that, we'll be asking for feedback and hearing from these young people again, what would they like to see in the support offer. So we'll have some of it scheduled beforehand, but again, just being really live to their needs and what they want. I've spoken a little bit about the advisors. Last year we had 3 young advisors, and this year we decided that we needed more diversity of opinion in the advisory board. I don't know if that's the right word, but in our group of advisors. So we recruited 5 new young advisors, all of which were challenge and change partners last year, and we hope to keep using this as a model to make sure that we're learning from the experiences of previous challenge and change participants and continuing to grow the program and using the experiences of those who've been through it rather than just us kind of guessing what people's experiences were. And we also have continued with 2 of the advisors from the first iteration for some consistency, basically. This year we've decided to kind of fund the same number of young people at the same sort of level. The first iteration was launched in the middle of COVID, which meant things were really not typical. Funding was difficult to spend because events weren't existing, and yeah, we really want to make sure that this time we're kind of iterating, learning and improving before hopefully over the next 2 years looking to grow the program and maybe fund some more young people, maybe fund them at a higher level. It's all kind of up in the air and unknown, but all very very exciting. So as I said, we've committed to running challenge and change for the next 3 years. So I mean, yeah, loads of learning, loads to implement, and it's all really exciting. Just in terms of a little update of where we're at with this iteration of challenge and change. So we closed applications and we're currently in the process of shortlisting. Really exciting this year to read all of the applications and like just continue to see the amazing work that people are doing, and also the shift as well of having more service delivery organizations and service delivery type applications this year. Yeah, really exciting, and hopefully by the end of June we'll have a final list that our advisors will be working with us to define. Back to you, Callum.
Okay, thanks, Rochelle. And yeah, that has been me and Rochelle's and Jaden's kind of last week or two. So our head's very much just kind of in the early stages of Challenge and Change 2, which is really exciting. Yeah, now straight over to Jaden, who's going to host a Q&A panel with everyone who's just spoke.
Nice one, Callum. And thank you guys for the whole breakdown. Like, it seems like a proper journey. I know I've been involved in it, but like just hearing you guys feeding it back, it's a proper picture that you're painting, and we've got some amazing questions from the audience, so I'm going to be wheeling one by one and then I'm going to be pointing it in different people's directions, so the hot seat might be coming to you, so get prepared. So the first question we have is from Joe Rich, and Joe's asking, how have you captured the impact of involving young people at each step of designing and decision making? Can we do more to capture the impact of working like this across as funders? I'm going to go to Joe to begin that.
Great, thanks. That's quite an easy one for me to answer, in the sense that we haven't needed to measure the impact that our young advisors have had on this work, because it has been so unbelievably obvious. Like literally from the name of the fund, the branding that you saw at the beginning, the kind of colours, the way the application was, who this fund was there for, every single aspect of it was designed by the YAs and has taken us so much further than if we had this idea. We wanted to fund young people directly. And and then we brought young people in to start working with them on how to do that, and instantly, like, the impact of doing that was huge. And I should say, like, it's been so transformative for Blagrave. We now have 16 paid young advisors across 2 other programs of work, the Listening Fund, which Lottery and others on this call are part of, and another program, Restart Youth. And in both those instances as well, like, the richness of insight coming from the young people is so clear in terms of how that translates into design and decision making, that we haven't needed to measure it, but for sure there's work to do in sharing that learning. Yeah, I'm not saying there isn't that, but it's just been obvious.
That's amazing, Jo. And I'm actually going to throw this question to Days as well. Like, how have you felt the impact of being involved in the design and decision making process, and what has that felt like for you?
I think it's many folds. I think one, like, bearing in mind I come from like a very odd work background. I've grown up working in movements, so it's so different from the philanthropy world. And I think coming in and kind of having this like holding hand in learning how to make a grant, but then also like having this like flexibility to bring in some of the learnings that I've learned from working in movements and from working with grassroots organizers, and having that part of the grant was just like particularly like like that fusion. I think it was really important because I was able to speak the language that the young change makers who were applying spoke to, so it made it feel like we were more like a friendly friend who was helping them kind of get to their own aims. Which I think looking at the ways that we learn in that way, it's really important. And I think also there's something about sharing our learnings as well. I really enjoy, because I do so many talks about, you know, how do we get young people to feel supported by the philanthropy sector, and a lot of the time people like kind of want to do it, but they're fearful because they don't know, and there's a lot of great areas to play around with, which I've been very fortunate to try to get involved in. So I think there is something about like learning from our learnings, but then also recognizing that we are still in the early phases, and this is a time where if all of us start trying things that are different or wacky, we can even get to better understanding of how to do better next time. You know, this is like a very much a iterative process.
That's amazing, Days. Thank you so much. And then I guess to unpack the latter end of that question, Balji, like, what more can be done to capture the impact of working like this across the funds and different organizations?
Thank you. I'm going to keep it short. Read the report. It was it was so easy even to go, we should make it short and snappy with images that the sector does with branding and comms and impact reports. No, we need to highlight what we know so far and to share that back, because this isn't about holding on and leading it. This is about everybody doing the work. And so as much as it might be for those who don't want to read too much, do dive into it as well. But again, it's that notion of impact. We really need to learn from, as Daisy has just said, integrating live, learn, practice expertise. We had young change makers who have lived experience of being young people, but activists, right? They were integrating that knowledge of young change makers as activists. And so we need to learn from them about what impact means, because it's very different from what we might think what impact is. So much more needs to be done around that by the sector, by large.
That's amazing, Balji. And we've got another question from Kerry. And I'm going to point this to you, Rochelle. And this kind of talks about what happens next for the young people who have received the funding, e.g. ongoing support or options for next steps.
Thanks, Jaden. Well, once the young people have received the funding, it's the welcome day. We'll be figuring out the support plan with them and for them as well. We know that from last year, a lot of young people were asking for sessions around budgeting and how to creatively come up with a strategy and how to move forward with that. So we know a few sessions that they want, but ultimately I can't tell you the full support offer until we've met all the young people and they've told us what they need. Once the funding kind of So that will kind of happen at the beginning, and they'll always have access to support from myself. They'll have access to the safeguarding officer throughout. They'll have access to lawyers throughout. We'll always be connecting them in with other people. We'll be running knowledge exchanges with lived experience elders that are like working in the fields that they're working in, there's just loads that's going to be happening. There's going to be loads of support from them, and also loads of learning and probably loads of changing. So I don't want to commit too much to saying exactly what it will be right now, but we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that they are felt super supported.
That's amazing, Rochelle. Big up. And I guess I'm gonna this question kind of touches on the inception of the idea, so we're going to throw it back to Joe. And this question comes from Asamina. And where did the idea for the fund come from in the first place? So that where did it all start, Joe?
So I'm very passionate about closing the distance between funders and the communities that they serve. And I think that even though we work a lot through youth sector organisations and formal youth charities, for quite a long time in Blagrave, we had been formally kind of growing our own direct relationships with young people, kind of unmediated by charities, including through having our own trustees. And through that, and through actively and consciously kind of learning and listening to what young people were saying themselves, and hearing about work that was happening in the wider space, including, for example, quite high profile stuff like, youth climate strikers, we were developing like a growing sense of there's more potential out there than we understand. There are more young people mobilizing and doing work out in communities than we know about, and maybe we're like missing something. So I think that was like the seed of the idea, came from this kind of growing proximity of the team, myself, to young people, and what that proximity has done, without any question for me, is it enables trust. Because once you start meeting people like Days, and then you're like, maybe you should apply to become a trustee, then you start to just grow trust and confidence in young people and who are out there. And then actually it became a no-brainer. And then, as I briefly mentioned, when the pandemic hit, and then George Floyd, and young people were out on the streets, and we were thinking about what is our response to the pandemic, and kind of analysing the really quite overwhelming situation for a lot of young people with housing and so many challenges that actually even 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and certainly not my generation have faced. It just felt like a no-brainer, like to actually just invest directly in them. So that was the story. And then it was like, well, how do we do it?
And then I guess, thank you so much for that, Joe. So that from that how do we do it point, Balji, over to you. Like, where did it all start in terms of that conversation with the Blagrave?
Yeah, thank you. It was, so we had kind of shared aligned kind of values on getting the money out, but then it was the doing part. And I think that's where, and a huge shout out to Philippa as well, who was really, both of us like thinking, right, even before kind of engaging with and having the young advisors come on board, we've got to give them agency to do the work as well. And how can we do that and get out of the way? And so it was really starting to, first of all, say, right, okay, Blagrave, are you sure you want to do this? Like, are you just like, everything's fine, come by let's get the money out, when actually you're a funder, charitable purposes, all of that, legal requirements. As a recovering human rights lawyer and those working with funders, we knew all those were going to be issues, those anxieties and fears. But what is it that truly are your red lines, your assumptions of this fund? What are you trying to do? So that was a really important part, because transparency is key, folks. We often dance around things to safeguard people from too much information, but actually clarity and transparency is absolutely key. That's when people have agency, right, to be able to really drive the work. And that was, and really it was about curating the space to really think about equity-centered design. I think we are plagued by consultative, predetermined agendas of approaches. Human-centered design, folks, is a great way of like, all right, here we go. We just like think about, but it's a consultative approach. You have to really think about the agency, the ways of communication, the learning styles of everyone who's a part of that design journey. And then I would simply say it's probably, I could leave that to Days to possibly answer, because then it was really truly about, we're just here for the young change makers, and they were bossing it.
So going on to you, Days, how was that process for you, that starting point, hearing something like this, like being on one end of applying for funds and then hearing this dedication from a funder? How did that feel for you? Did you like, how was that feeling from the get-go? Oh, you're on mute at the moment.
You still don't get used to that after how many years? I think it was extremely reaffirming to like my own experiences of trying to apply for grants, especially like I do a lot of direct action, and I know that I am the very sexy but very risky funder's nightmare. So I think coming from that place, I was like, oh, okay, what barriers to entry were in my way for me to get to where I needed to be when it comes to applying for grants. And I know, like, you know, even for example, I'm neurodiverse, I'm not the greatest grant writer, and I know that was one of my flaws. So when coming to, you know, how are we gonna apply for people, that was something that we kept in mind, you know, and whether it's through Chloe, who was one of the other young advisors, it was like the ideas of like, what were our barriers, and then how do we kind of make sure that they don't exist in the situation of this grant. But I also think there is something about like, it was really lovely kind of having this very like loose frame, but then also being able to create within it. Because a lot of the time, when we talk about, you know, young people, I feel like it's either one extreme of, oh, we want to hear you comment on it, but we don't actually want you to have any power over it. Or it's like, here, make a grant, and then they just leave you and there's no support whatsoever. So it was really lovely to kind of felt really cared for within this process, but then also kind of like had that moment to be like, oh, okay, you know, we have the power in this decision-making process. Yeah. So I think that was kind of like the most like enlightening part of being a part of it, and knowing that, you know, all doors for possibilities were open. And I remember quite fondly how at the beginning I wanted to fund as young as 12. I was told this was not possible by the charity lawyers. However, it was just the fact that like even just like that kind of what's seen as quite ludicrous was able to kind of at least be met with an answer, with a discussion, with a conversation. And that was really awesome.
Do you know what, Days? Yeah, that sounds amazing. And like, I guess you and Baljeet have kind of touched on it, and it kind of alludes to Dan's question about activism, but also supporting young people directly. And I guess, what were some of the worries about funding young people directly, and how can you help other funders be less worried about it? So maybe, yeah, Days.
Yeah, I feel like I think it is just that trust thing. It's I think people don't know like how amazing young people are, and it's probably because a lot of people who fund young people have never actually like been in a classroom or been in a youth center, who actually kind of like had a very like hands-on approach with meeting young people where they're at. And once you do that, you kind of just realize that young people, one, they are so thankful for the opportunity, and two, like they want to make sure that they don't mess up the opportunity for themselves and for others, you know, so they take so much care in making sure that they don't mess up. And that, you know, so I think that like the risk that's associated with funding young people, especially individuals, it's something that I think we've kind of conjured in ourselves and can't let go of, you know. And there is something really amazing about being able to let go and actually say, I'm fully putting my trust in the young people that we're funding, you know, and know that like if anything were to go awry, they would call us because they know that we trust them and they know that they are responsible in that way. And that was really, really quite comforting. And, you know, as far as it's gone now, we haven't actually had any issues. So that approach does work.
That's amazing. And Baljeet?
Yeah, just to really riff off that as well, I think we also need to kind of like the culture shift change of the youth sector, right, needs to happen in order to really allow this work to surface. there are and there always have been amazing youth charities, right, doing amazing work and paving the way. But actually, the approach to social action and youth leadership has really also, this is one thing that the young advisors also are saying, I know Days and Chloe especially, but also the challenging changers who have had connection with some youth sector organisations going, look, we have ideas, but we're also doing the work. We don't need an adult-led charity to then tell us and speak on our behalf or try and mould our idea into the way that they think works best. We're actually doing it. And so that's that approach. I think that culture shift in the sector needs to happen around this whole kind of social action and the support for social action. That is great, and that work is still needed. Young people should all be given agency to do social action work. But what about the change makers who are disrupting systems, who need support? We've left them out, and they need investment and they need knowledge exchanges. And that's really what Challenge and Change has done, is to recognise those change makers already doing the work, who need investment resource for their ideas, but also to be able to work in collaboration with the youth sector and flipping the script a little bit. And I would just touch on this as well, and as Daisy and I had a wonderful conversation around this, and the report also touches into it, is now with this lived experience coming out and being now a term that everybody's using, this kind of codependent, vulnerable lens that many have around people with lived experience, or young people with lived experience, othering them, as well as though that they need more support and trauma. Yes, all of that is true. We need to be better at trauma-informed approaches to working practices across the piece in the justice sector, but we also have to recognise there are young change makers activating expertise beyond their personal story and trauma, actually innovating in activist spaces and campaigning spaces.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And Joe, as a funder, that question over to you. Is there anything more you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just put a few bits in the chat about some of the work that the charity lawyers supported us on, and supported the young people on, just talking through things like private and public benefit, and campaigning and political action, and engaging in illegal campaigning, and what was doable. And it was a very interactive conversation with the lawyers, which was followed up as well with a further session for anyone that wanted it. And I think it was amazingly reassuring to Blagrave and to me, I guess, as the CEO, to just see how seriously the young people took their responsibilities. Like they were not gonna, on the kind of risk thing, they were not gonna mess up on the first grant that they'd ever received. Like they wanted to understand really clearly what the parameters of this work were for them. And it was amazingly reassuring, which is why we're committed to 3 more years, no question.
Amazing. That's amazing. And no easy task either, but it's amazing to hear. And I guess Rashid has got a point as well. And he talks to, can we say a little bit more about the tensions and dilemmas around funders not positioning themselves as experts on safeguarding issues, but also practices like directly employing young youth workers outside of their community context? Baljeet, I'm going to go to you for this one.
Sorry, Jane, just clarify the question so I make sure I answer it as well. Or was it more of a statement? Sorry.
So the question was kind of alluding to the tensions and dilemmas around funders not positioning themselves as experts. So it alludes to something that you mentioned earlier around issues like safeguarding, and how do they, I guess, the question is about how far is it appropriate for funders to become directly active and interventionists in their funding spaces?
Yeah, I think it also really speaks to what Joe was touching on earlier as well, is about, but I think this is beyond just this kind of approach. It's across the social sector by large, right? We know that we need more people from communities in the workforce working in funders. For far too long, we've had largely white middle-class funders in London making decisions on grants across social justice spaces for even older change makers and community activists and groups and organizations, and we need to shift that, right? And we need to shift that because what's really crucial is, and that's where understanding the expertise we need, moving away from lived experience as a voice and as a story that we're constantly focusing on, but vital expertise that's necessary in terms of knowledge. So if we're looking at jobs and workforces, we need to be thinking about, and that's what happened with Challenge and Change, is bringing in young people who had lived experience of not only being young as well, but also some of the injustices, lived experience of the injustices that Challenge and Change were seeking to address, but then also having learned expertise and practice expertise like you and Rochelle with youth work, right? Youth work, and also working project management, working in activist spaces, working as community organizers. It wasn't even hard to find you and Rochelle, and you both came on so quickly once the onboarding had happened, and caught the wave of chaos that was happening as well. And that was because of your varied expertise. And this is what we've got to understand as a sector when we're thinking about our projects, our programs, from design, inception, not after the event. Inception, we have to be thinking about this. And we're so guilty in the sector of having a great idea, a great intention, some funding somewhere, and not even having that, the whole strategy design, the whole of the program being designed from inception with the right expertise.
It's amazing. And Joe, you mentioned something in the chat. Over to you as well about the safeguarding.
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly on safeguarding, and I'm by no means an expert, and again, we're learning loads, but we've been lucky, I think, to find one of our team. Ed found a really amazing safeguarding person who's been working with us, and she's been really clear in reminding us, which is great, that Challenge and Change is a program that is about agency and empowerment of young people, and they are all 18. That was one of our red lines actually in Blagrave, that we funded 18 and above because they are, you know, legally adults. And so we have to have a really careful kind of clear line between giving the young people enough information about safeguarding where they're working with other young people, that they have enough information and support that they need, which this person can provide, but also understanding that we're their funder. We're not their like trusted friends, and you know, they have their own communities, and they may well, throughout Challenge and Change, we've seen, face difficulties, and absolutely we're here to support them if they want our support. But ultimately this is a program about agency and empowerment, and just holding that line on safeguarding and being really clear about that is really important.
Amazing, amazing. And I guess a little bit about that support offer as well. Katie from Neon had a question there, just to make sure that we get through all of the questions. Did you build on the political education to help them navigate the work they were trying to do? If so, how did you build on the political education? And I'm going to go over to Rochelle, but you can also bounce that one back with me. But
yeah, I don't think I really understand this question, so I'm gonna have to pass that one on to someone else. Sorry.
I can answer that, Jaden, and then Daisy might want to also riff off as well. Is that, again, that's the notion of assuming that young people aren't political out there, right? Challenge and Change funded young people who were political, and did they tell us about their political education in their applications. It was shining through through their political frameworks, the way they were seeing the world, climate injustice, intersectional injustice, the way they were thinking about their systems change journey as well. So I think this is where we flip the script around. You know, what I was touching on supporting young people to be in the social action space. Challenge and Change was space for young activists and campaigners to be supported for the work that they were doing out there. Daisy, I don't know if you wanted to add more onto that.
Yeah, and I think like even just going through this process, even, you know, as a young advisor, there was so many, like, you know, like I work in the change making space, and there were so many things that I was like, oh, actually, I need to think about my own beliefs in this. I need to think about my own bias. You know, I don't know much about the Romanian Gypsy community. Is that why I think that they may not need help? Like, you know, and it's like asking yourself some of the hard questions. And I feel that young people in particular are very aware that we hold biases, and like, you know, we're quite humble to the fact that we're constantly learning. So that was like particularly like amazing part. And I think like going forward, you know, even just by being involved in a process like this, whether it's as someone who's receiving the grant, as someone who's helping making it, there is like, you know, that in itself is politically educating, because you get to learn so much about topic areas that may have never crossed your mind. So yes, I definitely feel like I've learned a lot in this process.
And I would also add as well, I think one of the thanks Days, because one of the things that happened, and Days and Chloe and Jovan had all predicted this, you have to create spaces for the young activists to come together, because many of the young activists are supporting young activists. So actually some of the challenging changes, some of their work was to actually support one another with political education, so knowledge exchanges between themselves, and we didn't have enough space for that because of the real time as well. But definitely what's coming up is how are, you know, the adults moving out the room as well, but how can we have equitable spaces of reciprocal learning with adult activists as well, and that political education as well. So it was really humbling to see the challenging changes immediately when they first all came to just introduce with one another. Some of them just saying, how can we share our work? How can we collaborations that started to happen of sharing toolkits and approaches, but also even with, especially in the racial justice space as well, and the intersectional spaces and connections that were happening.
On that point as well, around the political education, sometimes it's accessible language. Sometimes people are being political, but in their own ways, and communities have different ways of communicating. And again, that's something as funders we have to like really unpack a lot more in terms of the language we're using. Actually, like people are using language that is fit for purpose for their communities, and maybe that we might not see it in a certain way, but this is how we have those conversations. So that's just something that, again, what more could we do is actually understanding that people communicate in very different ways, but it's no less credit to what the conversation is about. Sorry, I thought I might add. Joe, would you like to jump in as well?
Yeah, it's just that I saw someone said, you know, what else are you going to do? And there's just a point I want to make before I'm conscious of time that I think is really important to the funders, because I'm leaving Blagrave, so I get a chance to just like put my last kind of plea out there. Like there's growing interest and appetite in this work, and funders like Paul Hamlin and Esme doing amazing things with Act for Change, and they put up a brilliant website on funding young activists. But my like really heartfelt plea, having been on this journey, is we just cannot replicate a funding system that is already rife with challenges for adult-run organisations for these young people. And what that means is we've got to align our strategies and our funding with young people leading the way if we want to have impact or any sense of scale, supporting the infrastructure behind this and kind of sharing knowledge. Like if funders just all start going off and doing this work on their own, and we don't want to do that in Blagrave, we really want to work with other funders in a much more strategic, collaborative way, then we will not prioritise kind of equitable access to opportunities and resources for young people in this country. And it's hard work, but that's the job, that's our job, and it feels really clear to us in Blagrave. I just want to say that.
No, that's an amazing point, Joe, and I think that's a nice way of rounding it up, to ask the rest of the panel as well, like what more could be done, and like what more could be done at the Blagrave, at the Centre for Knowledge Equity, on all different levels, but as a sector to continue to push the boundaries and reimagine this space. Rochelle, I'm gonna come to you. What more could be done? What are our hopes and dreams for the sector now?
So much. So much can be done, and like, yeah, hopes and dreams are just continuing learning, continuing challenging each other, and continue being aspiring. Like, we're a small team at Blagrave, but my god, are we all like ambitious, and we've all got so many dreams. And sometimes I'm like, god, can we slow down for 5 minutes? But also, actually, no, let's not do that, let's keep going, let's keep pushing. And I think there's so much more to be done, but I would really just like, I will continue to, and I really hope that other people continue to challenge each other and ask ourselves the hard questions and keep ourselves humble and just listen to the voices that we need to be listening to and stop putting our opinions on them. Yeah.
We got Rochelle and Baji. I'm going to come over to you with the same question.
I mean, it's just been an inspiring journey, right? You never stop learning. We will never stop learning. And my, the young change makers, like the world is an ever fast-paced, evolving world. And we get stuck the older you get in the ways of doing things and working hard. And I know what to do. And I've worked so hard to have this career and I've got all this expertise and wisdom in it. Surely we just need to add to that. No. Innovation, new ideas, the world is moving fast, so it's crucial that we need to see this as not as a nice trendy thing to do, right? It should be the way forward. And I think another thing I want to add is, and it's happening in many justice spaces, is that, oh, that funder's doing it over there, so we'll do something else, right? Funders don't own a cause, right? You know, Blagrove also, they don't own the cause, you know, and this is what's so beautiful about even being part of conversations with Esme and Paul Hamlin, and, you know, the funders also coming together to try and really think differently as well. So every funder needs to be doing this work, I would say. And from the Centre for Knowledge Equity perspective is there are thousands and thousands of young people out there in the communities really disrupting, and their lives are living. It's not just lived, they are living injustice every single day, and they're still out there creating the change. They aren't invisible to the communities, they are to those with power, right? They may not have social media accounts either, but they're in community. And this is what we have to understand, that there are many, many, many more, and we've had to find resource from our own unrestricted funds to support all the young Lex leaders and the network that is emerging across the UK, across communities who are starting to come together as well. We need to do more as the Centre for Knowledge Equity to support the young Lex leaders who are there to say, look, we're working on social justice issues with our elders, but we have unique needs as young'uns as well. So how can us young'uns come together? But we also want to work with our elders. Let's not get caught up in the culture wars and too many kind of analysis of Guardian articles. Our communities are out there. We want to work together. We just don't have the spaces to do it, and we need resource.
Amazing. And Days, what we saying? Same question over to you.
Oh my God, second everything that's been said. Yeah, and thank you so much for encouraging this kind of really rich debate. And thank you so much for listening as well as the funders. I feel like sometimes, you know, it's hard to kind of listen about what we might not be getting right, you know, and it's really amazing that we are learning how to challenge and change ourselves and challenge and change the systems that we are in, you know, so it's like learning in that way. But I think it is about learning how to reach the people who are hardest to reach, and that being like the guiding force, because a lot of the time when we want to fund young people, we pick the ones with 50k followers on Instagram, but don't recognize that those are probably not the ones who need the most resourcing, and those are probably not the ones who are going to create the change, if I have to be honest. You know, so it's like, how do we learn how to basically fund outside of where we're comfortable funding and learn how to work with other people, and that being a really important part. So that's like kind of like my plead for the sector. It's how do we continue to challenge and change ourselves and our own perspective, especially when it's coming to grant making.
Do you know what, that's big facts. So like, Days, thank you so much for that. And like, I guess, do you want to say quickly?
Jaden, can I just add as well, because Daisy's humility is insane, right? Even though everything she achieves, I think I saw someone ask, oh, the lawyers seem to have got it, so who are the lawyers? Trust me, the lawyers didn't get it in the way that needed to be got. It was the young change makers and us working with the lawyers. This is what we say as young people. What do you mean by your legal advice here? And the lawyers were also working to shape and shift the way that they speak and understand as well the language they were using. And Days and the YAs and the team here were all part of that, getting the lawyers to also do their practice better. So challenging and changing lawyer systems too. And
that's the collaboration there. So we give thanks. And you know what I was thinking, that as we've gone on throughout this, like the words of Lauryn Hill in the X Factor, it could all be so simple. And I think that is the idea, like, it's action. What do we need right now? We need a little bit of action, and people to not think that there's too many barriers for this, because communities are out there doing the work. It just takes a little bit of collaboration and stepping out of our comfort zone to reach those communities, because they're there. And I would kind of like as this work goes forward, I know people have spoken about what is the future of the fund, to invite the new Bladegrave CEO Eli, just to introduce himself, share like what are your hopes and dreams for the fund, Eli, and the work at the Bladegrave. Now you're stepping into the position.
Thank you. And Jaden, how am I supposed to go after a quote from Miss Lauren Hill? Hi, everybody. I thought I could hide in the background and just listen into this amazing conversation, but my hopes and dreams. How long has everyone got? I think Carol in the chat, hope I'm pronouncing your name right, spoke about the humility of young people. And I think that's something that a lot of funders could learn from. And I think it's already been said in the panel. So I'm just going to be repeating, but, not seeing ourselves as the experts feels really important. And I think from my kind of time working in the funding space, sometimes people just need to get out of the way. And it's that simple, because there's people ready to take up. They're already doing the change, they're doing the work, whether they have the resources or not sometimes. So I really see our role as sometimes just getting out of the way, listening, and moving things in the right direction. So I guess those are some of my thoughts. I'm particularly interested around kind of funders or kind of the funding sector being made accountable. Feels really important as well in a space where there's so much power and not too much in terms of checks. And I think there's something there around being accountable in a way that holds you to a better standard, really, to assess your own internal biases as individuals with a huge amount of power and that are positioned as gatekeepers to big resources that in my mind are not ours. They're everybody's. So yeah, I'm going to stop there because I'll probably ramble on, but thank you for inviting me to share, and a huge shout out to everybody involved in this event and the Challenge and Change Fund. I'm so excited to be a part of it.
Big up, Eli, and thank you, panel, for getting involved. It's been a pleasure. I'm gonna
and Jaden, I just want to say, Joe as well, it takes a lot of leadership even within the funders to really make this stuff happen, right from the top. As much as we don't want to think there's hierarchy, there is, folks, and so that leadership is, and that discomfort is needed. So Joe being able to move and shift, and we've had challenging conversations often, that leadership and that courage is needed. And often, even if you can sometimes feel like an island, but then also constantly wanting to collaborate as well, I think is so crucial. But walking the walk, and I think that we thank you for that. So much gratitude for that leadership as well. And also just to say, and then to have someone like Eli coming on board, who the work that you've been doing in community as a young activist as well. And the Lex movement has always seen that young people have often been creating the change, are still the change makers now, even when they're now older, but to really do that support work early on and not wait till the end. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the crew, and Asha's in the building, who was also part of the team as well, doing the work.
We got
Great, yeah, and thanks to Jaden too, who's been part of it throughout and has done an incredible job facilitating, and Philippa, who's in this call, who's also part of the original team. So yeah, we're just out of time now. So yeah, just to end, thank you all for coming, but don't let this be the end of the conversation. Please do get in touch with us if you want to follow up, if you want to learn more about this, if you want to start getting involved in this work yourself. And we're really open to collaborating and working with you all. And we'll be kind of following up with the recording and also the report via email as well. But please do, tweet to us or email us. We've got all of our personal emails on our website, but also challengeandchange@bladegravetrust.org. Thank you all.